Do you ever feel like one failure could define your whole life? Maybe you missed the opportunity, the grade, the job, the team, the girl, the guy, and it felt like the end of the story. But what if failure isn't the end? What if it's the beginning? What if failure's a door that opens, that allows you to be able to fulfill the destiny, the plan, that thing which, honestly, when I look at Scripture, God wants to give to us? To help me tackle this topic, I have two guests returning to the podcast today, Joshua Turner and Gary Ruelas. Dr. Joshua Turner is a lead scientist at SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory and a Department of Energy Early Career Awardee. With over 200 publications and 8,500 citations, his work spans quantum, magnetism, X-ray imaging, and AI, blending precision, computation, and curiosity to explore the unseen world. Dr. Gary Ruelas, founder and medical director of the Integrative Medical Institute, holds dual doctorates, medicine and psychology, nationally recognized in integrative care. He blends science, behavioral health, and spirituality to guide patients toward harmony of body, mind, and spirit. So here's the big question for today's conversation. How do we move from fearing failure to embracing it so we can find freedom from that fear to follow God's plan? Welcome to Spirituality, our podcast. We're excited today because we're going to talk about things that have to do with the fear of failure. Although the fear of failure is not the only thing we're going to talk about, but the last time you heard us, it was myself and Josh Turner and Gary Ruelas, and we were talking. We had a great time together. We didn't want to stop, and as a result, we're back. And in being back, Gary and I were able to hear a little bit of a story that Josh was trying to get into the first episode, but I cut it like a bad director. And so Josh was like, "What are you doing? You cut the whole plot of the movie." And so I got Josh back in here. Folks, listen up. Gary and I know a tiny bit of the story, but I think this will set the tone for talking about failure, not being risk averse, being risk tolerant, being willing to take gambles in your life in order to see good things happen, maybe even big things happen. But ultimately, let's let Josh tell that story. Josh and Gary, welcome on in, and we'll let Josh get us started.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us again. When I think of failure, so I have a lot of stories about failure. So that's, I got a big list of those. But the thing I wanted to share about was, it was a time where catastrophic thinking really almost took me out. And, it was, going back to undergrad, I was getting interested in doing physics. I started, applying to all these schools, and, I got rejected to all the top schools I wanted to go to as an undergrad, except for Santa Barbara. So I go to Santa Barbara as an undergrad, and I started getting interested in physics. And what I learned is that Santa Barbara is like one of the top schools in physics.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, hey, now we got something on. Maybe I have an opportunity here. I ended up getting a summer internship at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So everything's going really great. I'm thinking, okay, now we get another chance. So I applied to grad school. Again, applied to all the top schools. And what happened was I wasn't getting where I wanted. I didn't get into any of the schools I wanted to get into. In fact, I remember, I think it was UC Berkeley. I didn't hear from them. And of course, now I go, if you're the top recruit, they're probably going to let you know. But, I hadn't heard anything. So I said, hey, let me find out what's going on. So I called the physics department on a payphone from the library. And I am asking, hey, this is Josh Turner. Hey, I just have a question. I want to know if I got into the grad school. And of course, the person's like, who? What? And I'm like, I'm calling. I applied. Just want to make sure. I didn't hear anything, and, the lady's like, I'll be right back. And I'm sitting there on the phone. Felt like hours, but, it was probably like a minute or something. She comes back. Sorry, you didn't make it. Click. Hangs up the phone.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sitting there on the payphone just going, that was my last chance, everything rejected everywhere. I'm sitting there on the phone. And if you ever had this moment where you're just like my whole world just fell apart. This was my whole world. What am I going to do? And, but as it turns out, I ended up getting to school in Boston. So I did go to grad school, but not what I thought I was going to do.
Right.
And where the story takes a turn is I started studying the Bible when I got to Boston. And as I'm studying the Bible, I'm learning about God, learning how to change my life. And that was tough to study with. I'm in physics grad school. I'm arguing with people, I'm discussing all kinds of things. And, let's talk about Big Bang Theory. Let's talk about science and God and everything. And maybe that's that's another
This is good.
podcast.
I'm enjoying it.
But what happened was I got to the point where I go, okay, God, I'm gonna go all in. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna completely change my life around. And I completely humbled out, and I changed my life. I got baptized. I became a disciple. And soon after that event happens, you'll never guess what happens. I don't even believe it myself, except for it happened to me. I end up getting an opportunity to go back to Berkeley and do my PhD work. And the crazy thing about this is that it wasn't, I didn't do anything different. I know it wasn't me because I'd already applied and I got rejected. So on my own strength, on my own accolades, I did nothing. Once I became a disciple, once I finally said, okay, God has a different plan, all of a sudden I get the opportunity to go back and do my grad work at Lawrence Berkeley Lab through this fellowship. And it was almost as if, God was giving me my dream back, but it was going along, it was a different path than I anticipated, than I expected.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So it's, it's just an example to me of like, especially as we're talking about failure and things like this, sometimes we sort of have our vision of what's going to happen. And, there's just a better path. There's a better plan that God has in store. So,
well, what you're saying is, I think there's a lot of interesting aspects of what you're talking about, because you're not just talking about failure or rejection. You're talking about destiny. You're talking about a path. And I think regardless of what someone believes, whether they believe in God or they don't, or whether they believe in Jesus or they don't, whether they're an agnostic, an atheist, a Buddhist, or whatever, I think most people in their own heart, and I'll get Gary in on this, most people on their own heart know that there's something more to life than just waking up, going to school or going to work, coming home, going to sleep, and getting up and doing it again. I think most people know that or feel that, but along the way, sometimes I think people lose it because of what they go through. And I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Josh, once I get Gary in here, because I want you to tell the rest of the story that I remember, because I want to hear the rest of the story, with the audience hear the rest of the story. But Gary, get on here, because I think Josh has said a lot of things about, resilience and failure, and also about, how God or the forces of destiny could be at work in your life. Go ahead and get on in there.
I think there's a part of my brain that's always looking at the opposite side of whatever is being discussed, right? So there's this critical thinking, which I have to always shut down, because no matter what, I'm arguing with the pastor or the rabbi. Or, what about this? What about that? And I think it's, it serves a purpose, but I'm listening to your story and I'm thinking, that's a really great blessing. But what do we tell people who don't get into that others? What if their avenue went another way? They never got the PhD.
Yeah.
They didn't even get into graduate school.
Yeah.
What do we do with that? They're not Christian enough, or they didn't study the Bible enough? Is that what we're saying? Because if we say, and I love your story, I became a disciple, I committed to God, and I feel God blessed me.
Yeah.
What about the opposite of that coin?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're speaking to, Russ, to say there's a something beyond the circumstance, something beyond the attainment. We're blessed when we have it. It can sometimes own us. Pretty soon we think we're really good because of what we've gotten.
Yeah.
But I think it's independent of that. And that's a deeper level that I think a lot of people, I being one of them, struggle with. That our circumstance is not what spirituality is about. And how do we find that resilience through faith, through turning it over to God, to saying, your will be done. I'm in this darkness of this valley. I'm in the valley of the whale. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just going to succumb to it and find some value in that process. How do we find peace in the storm?
Right.
When the storm isn't stopping.
Right.
When the next cancer hits us.
Yeah.
When the next financial loss comes. Right. When our child gets ill. I mean, does that mean that I'm not doing my work? And some people would say, oh, no, I remember sometime my aunt, she was very, very religious, very Bible driven. And she says, God punishes people who don't believe in him with cancer. That was like an old,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
She got, that person's paying for their sins.
Right.
Oh my gosh,
Right.
That's kind of like a pretty heavy guilt laying thing.
That's
Until,
very
you
heavy.
realize,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you think, do people actually believe that? And maybe the fear guides them down to a better path. I don't know, but I believe that our soul and our spirit are beyond our circumstances. Right. Though God does bless us as well as, hey, maybe just see what we do with it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Right. One day we'll figure that out. But that was what was kind of going through my mind when I'm listening to that, thinking, what a wonderful story. And then there's that other side of the street, right?
Yep.
There's that other side of the street.
That's right.
So,
whatever that, however
that's the neighborhood most of us live in. I don't have a PhD, so I guess I didn't do enough right. That's what I've concluded from all of this. I'm a complete failure. I'm an abysmal man. Yeah. Let me throw one. I love.
Well, and I can say it the other way. So I got a couple of doctorates, but I certainly don't feel like I'm as smart as right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
It didn't resolve anything for me.
Yeah,
it didn't
both of you,
anything.
between the two of you, you've got multiple doctorates. But neither of you is Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs didn't even finish college. So
right.
I guess you both have. I guess you both have failed, and I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you through it. I'm here to help you go. How could we have done this much work and accomplished so little in our life?
But can I just say one thing though about the?
Yeah. Jump in there.
Because I think one thing's important. Like the story isn't like, okay, this is how you get a PhD or something. I think the core of it, at least when I look back and think about it, is, early on, my whole life was, am I going to get into grad school? This is my whole identity. Yeah. And I think it wasn't actually just the getting in the PhD program. What it was for me was, it was a reprioritization of everything. I realized this isn't everything. This is not, my whole world came crashing down, but because at that point, that was my world. And I guess I just realized there's other things to life. And I think that was part of the funny thing is I gave it up and said, fine, okay, I'm going to do this. And in so doing, God ended up giving me this dream I had anyway, which was sort of like, it's just kind of, it wasn't a priority then, but then of course you get it. And I think that's sort of the way God works as well, right? Like you don't know, what's going to happen. So,
well, I think I think your story can be your story and be completely accurate and right, and can be a path that other people can imitate. So I don't think you have to adjust or, modify or explain your story. It's your story. What Gary is saying, what do people do when they have a different story?
Well, and also what we focus on, I just want to comment on something that from your story, Jeff, from the little bit I know, and forgive me if I'm kind of overstepping some grounds.
We don't overstep ground here. We're like mud. We just flow.
When you told me your story of your early life, a child growing up in California, I don't somewhere I think Central
Turlock,
California. Turlock, yeah, and I never even heard of Turlock. So
most people haven't.
I went and looked it up, and that you were rising from that level of, agriculture, and where there's really kind of a vacuum of, let's say education institutions and what,
right.
And how something guided you to kind of pursue, and you found something that God said, hey, there's something in you, continue to pursue that. And all that struggle is this is my vision of you, as the young boy who grew up, became a teenager, and on his own launched out and is struggling. It's a struggle, that you went through, and hitting one wall after the other, and still that stamina to continue. And then it unfolds but to me, that's what Russ is addressing. There was something inside of you that led you to God, that led you to the Bible. But inherently, it's what do we want to call that energy, or that spirit, or that soul? He already had you. The day you converted, he just said, "Oh, now you finally acknowledge I've always had you."
Right.
It took you a while to catch up. Right. I was, I had you from birth. I had you all laid out, And, you were kind of still in that, but you pushed through so many things. That's the unspoken story in your story, right?
Yeah, I agree.
You really pushed through heavy, heavy walls of where you could have just stayed where you were.
Right.
Maybe done something different, but you didn't.
I think that your point, Gary, though, is still true. That's why I said that's Josh's story, and that he should tell that story as it is. It needs no explanation. What you're saying is, what if you do all the pushing, and what if you do all the work and your story turns out different? What if you get your girlfriend pregnant and instead of going to college, you go get a job? Does that mean you're a bad person? Does that mean you've blown it? Well, there's a scripture that I think will be an umbrella all this. And the reason I like what both of you are saying is because we're not just speaking to an audience that's Christian. We're speaking to an audience that's spiritual, and we're speaking to an audience that may not even be interested in spiritual. They're just interested in all these different sort of disciplines or ways of thinking coming together. That's who I hope is our audience includes. And so people can be able to go, I believe God guided Josh, and other people can go, I don't believe God guided Josh. I believe that there's a force of destiny. And some people can go, I don't think those are truths. I think he's just a hard worker and everybody else is lazy. And that's, I don't care what a person's view is, as long as we can sort of come together and understand that every aspect of it has a role. Me personally, my sort of situatedness, as they say, is Christianity. And so Proverbs 24 explains some of this to me. It says in Proverbs 24, verse 15 to 16, I'm using the English Standard Version for those who like to know, lie not in wait for a wicked man against the dwelling of the righteous. Do no violence to his home. And then it says in verse 16, for the righteous falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in times of calamity. What I think the Bible is saying is that, one, we know no one's perfect. So there's no one who's like, oh, I've never committed a, well, Jesus. There's no one who's like, I've never committed a sin, therefore I deserve this. But there are people who try to get their life right. And I think when the Bible talks about being righteous, he's talking about being right with him, but he's also talking about the fundamental attitude of just being right. It's a relational, the Greek and Hebrew words are relational. They're not performative. They're about, is my relationship with Gary right? I may have hurt his feelings. I may have done something wrong, but in the end, is it my motivation to be right with him? And this is important to me. So when I was a kid, I grew up in a suburban area that was very nice. And my mother taught in the inner city. I've told these stories before, but it's appropriate. She put us in what's called Kentwood suburban school system, which was one of the better ones in Michigan. But she said she didn't want to teach there because she wanted to go where black kids were and help black kids, because she'd grown up in the South and she had been a black kid, where one of the biggest moments in her life was when Jackie Robinson came to their school to speak to the students. And a lot of famous African Americans would go to the schools where the black kids were and tell them, hey, you can do this too. You can be this too. So my mom came to me one day and she said, you're not going to play basketball this summer in the summer team in Kentwood. You're not going to do that. You're going to go to the inner city. And I know Josh's son plays basketball, Elijah. And so you can tell Elijah, we got him in there. Elijah Turner, future Golden State Warrior. And Ben, Gary's son plays basketball. They're both big basketball fans. I think they're kind of budding friends. But my mom said, you're not going to play basketball in the suburbs here. You're going to go to the inner city and play on a team with one of the teachers I know, Mr. Lewis. And it's an inner city team because you don't have enough black friends. You don't have enough black friends. You need more black friends. And of course, I did not like the plan. I didn't want to do it. I didn't think it was any good. But, my parents weren't like diplomats. They didn't negotiate. They were like, unless we're mistaken, we're paying the bills. We're paying for the camps. We're paying for the shoes. Yeah. We're paying for the shorts. We're paying. And I said, okay, I got the point. So at 13 years old, I went down to the inner city. And what my mom did is my mom dropped me off because she had to go somewhere in Campaw Park. At that point, Campaw Park was not the safest or nicest area in the city. And for me, as a suburban kid, it was dangerous. I'm not saying people who lived there thought it was dangerous, but I thought it was that way. And I was standing there by myself at 13 waiting to play on a team that my mother was unaware of was 16 and above. She just knew Mr. Lewis, and he said, I'll take care of him. So I'm standing there in my, scared, and I see Mr. Lewis. I didn't know him. And then I got on this team. I was scared to death the whole time. And there's a couple of things I learned. Number one, these kids were playing basketball because they enjoyed it, but also because they hoped for survival. They thought, if I could make it in this sport, then maybe my life and my family's life can get better. I was playing basketball because I enjoyed it. And they had a fierceness and a tenacity and a grit that I did not have. A willingness to do things on the court and to work harder. And they were all better than me. I was the worst kid on the team, and I was one of the youngest. But the lesson I learned when I went is one that Gary is talking about. The only difference between them and me is that my parents, for whatever reason, had more than their parents. That was the only difference. But I wasn't better. I just happened to be born into that family. And I think sometimes it's the old George H.W. Bush statement that was made about him by Ann, I forgot her name, from Texas during the politics. She said George H.W. Bush was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. That was a famous political statement. And then, of course, Jim Harbaugh said that about Ryan Day from Ohio State, which I firmly endorse because I don't like Ohio State because I'm a Michigan fan, is he said Ryan Day's problem is he thinks, or he didn't say his name, but he goes, some people think they were born on third base and they think they've done something. I think one of the things that everyone needs to understand is we are in part not just our talents, but we're our genetics, we're our environment, we're everything. And the Bible says in Acts 17 that God's arranged the times and places where we're to be born and where we are in history. And so I think that if someone sits there and goes, well, I don't have a PhD, they need to understand there's still a purpose for your life and there's a reason you're there. Those kids changed my life. And they're one of the reasons why when I was in school in Boston, I decided to go to the inner city and work with inner city kids and spend 5 years there because I remembered that. And I thought, if I'm going to do something, I should help people that are African Americans and don't have much. And for the first time in my life, I went and lived in a lower middle class area. And so I think that what I want to say to people, especially because I'm concerned about people that have learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADHD, people have mental health challenges, people who do have, they live below the poverty line or at the poverty line. I think that they have to understand this. And I know I'm saying a lot here, but I'm going to go ahead and finish. I'll let you guys jump in here. My grandmother was a maid. That's where she started. And she eventually got a job working for the University of Tennessee football coach, head coach. And then she was able to get enough money, save enough money that she became a florist. But her goal was all of my kids are going to go to college. It didn't work out for her. My mom did, but my uncle, he went to the military, which is, in my opinion, a form of college. It's a way to develop yourself, and was a Marine. But then my mom got all of us to college. I think that your destiny may be that you're my grandmother. I got to be the maid so that my grandchildren can go to college. John Adams in the Revolutionary War said, is quoted as saying, the reason that I do what I do and fight for the freedom of America is so that my children don't have to fight, but they can be poets and writers and artists. And so I think you happen to be, in Josh's case, if you're listening, he's along the line of destiny of an entire family and group of people, but we would have to go back to your great-great-grandfather to know, well, how did this really happen? And on the other hand, someone else may go, well, my great-great-grandfather was a slave. Well, you may end up in a different place, but that doesn't mean your destiny is any less valuable.
This podcast episode is brought to you by The Chemistry Lab, a newsletter on deep spirituality. Why do we all say I'm fine when we're actually falling apart like a dollar store lawn chair? Because we're masking, hiding pain so people think we've got it all together. But it's fake. We're actually not really okay. So what's the answer? More self-help books and podcasts along with a $12 oat milk latte to wash it all down? Nope. What we need is like a light bulb moment with God. Like Paul said in 2 Corinthians 1, verse 8-9, we were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, We expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God. Life broke Paul down, so he had to rely on God. And when we rely on God, it builds spiritual attachments like deep friendships, trust, and love. Way better than the fake I'm fine culture that's really prevalent in America. So maybe the real flex isn't I'm fine, it's I'm walking with God. Check out the latest issue of the Chemistry Lab newsletter, We Are Not Okay, How a God Awakening Can Heal a Lonely America on Deep Spirituality. Visit deepspirituality.com/subscribe today. Now, back to the conversation.
So Gary, I'm saying all that to say, I love what you brought into the conversation, because there's a lot of people who listen and they go, well, I'll never do that. And then they just give up. And that's what this podcast to me should be about, is telling those people, and you don't need to give up. And just like you said, Gary, about Josh, it's not like Josh was born on third base. And so people need to understand that as well. So those are some thoughts I have, just that you guys got me percolating on. Too much.
Where should we? That's great, but like man, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think
Joshua.
it just reminds me of maybe it's a physics version of the story you just told, which is
I love that. Let's get that one.
This idea of born on third base, and I think just as you're talking, it reminded me of this my own experience, but going along the lines of what you're saying, I think when I was a freshman in college, and kind of going to what you said, Gary, too, about, the battles you face and how do you fight through. And I was a freshman in college, took my first physics course, and I was like, I think I want to do physics. And I get my first midterm, C-. Okay. And you might say, hey, that's pretty good, but a C- in physics is like 30% or something, it's like, it's bad. So I go in to talk to the professor.
Yeah.
And say, I need some help. And he looks at me, and he looks at my test, and he goes, physics isn't for everyone. And I go, yeah, but I need, do some help. He goes, I can't help you.
Wow.
And he goes, and actually, you should drop the drop deadlines this Friday. You should drop the class. That's what he told me. And I remember just feeling like, what? How can you sit, like, you don't even know you don't know nothing. And this person supposedly is supposed to teach me and help me was like, no. So I quit and I walked away and I never did physics again. No, I'm kidding.
Wow.
So what I really did was I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So I went back to my dorm room.
Yeah.
And looked at the physics book, and I just did, a certain chapter. I did all the problems in the back of the book by myself. I'm like, I'm just going to do this. Did all the problems. The next midterm comes. And of course, this has never happened again in my life, but this one experience was fun.
Don't say that.
Midterm, well, the next midterm, and there's this huge class of like 300 people, right?
No.
And I finished first. Never happened before, never happened again, because I just worked like crazy. And I picked up my, looked around, nobody's getting up. I walked down to the front with the test, and the professor's, he's just down there, and then he recognizes me, and he kind of has a smirk. He's like, oh, pretty hard, huh? And I looked at the test, and there's a box there. You put the test in the box. This is before online stuff. And I just threw the test in the box. I go, it's kind of easy, and walked out. But it was just like my moment where I was confronted with, there's a lot of experiences like that, right? Obstacles. And, was just determined to say, I'm not going to let this, in this case, this failure of this first test determine what I was going to do and who I was going to be. So,
but I got to ask a question, because I think this is really important, and because it ties into what we're talking about, and it ties into what Gary said about he knows your backstory. How in the world do you sit in front of I'm not sure I could have pulled that off, honestly. And no one's ever accused me of being short on confidence, but I'm not sure I could have pulled that one off. How do you sit there when a physics professor says to you, physics is not for everyone, and not just, there's two things. One, not just go take an easier path where you can get easy grades, whatever that major might be, or not just be so devastated about who you are as a human being that you ingest his negativity towards you. I'm not saying he's a negative guy. He's telling you the truth, I think, but you ingest that negativity and let it form your identity, because there are a lot of people listening, and this is the secret of what will make our conversation powerful. There are a lot of people listening who don't know how to do what you just did or described. They don't know how to hear something like that and not define them. I know kids, I know adults who have never been able to get past the definition that was given to them of who they were by another person. So maybe you can talk about that.
Right, absolutely.
Well, can I just comment a little bit about?
Please.
So I it kind of goes back to spirituality in some ways, and I'll tell you my physics story, kind of along the lines
Get it
of that,
in there. I want it all.
Come on.
Well, no,
now you got me.
But
All right, I'll write it down. We'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. But spirituality, I think, or our soul, or whatever you want to call it, whatever name it is, that there's some inner energy, passion that kind of even the scans, MRIs and PET scans have shown when people are spiritual, when they're driving in some that inner, whatever that is, some divine resonance. If it's like a plant getting sunlight to make chlorophyll, there's something organically that's waking up in them that transcends the logic, that transcends the limits. That when I was walking by in the park, there's all this cement, and there was a little, hole in the plaster or the grout, and a plant was coming out and it was flowering, right? And it stretched out and was reaching the sunlight. And I thought, that's what we do as humans when we tap into, when we open up, when our parents or our family, or we just wake up to that inner power that transcends all logic and all things, which is what Christ talked about. Now, we call it love. We call it the Holy Spirit. You can call it Dharma. You can call it whatever you want. There's an energy beyond the form. There's an energy beyond the logic that when we are resonating with it, when we're opening up to it, when we practice our prayers, our mantras, our meditations, our mindfulness, and we let it transcend the logic. There was a comment about AI and spirituality, right? I wrote this back to the New York Times editor and say, is AI going to take us over? And only if we lose our soul. Yeah. It's a tool to us. Right. But AI will never have a soul.
Yeah. Mm.
But it can consume us with its logic. Right. It can consume us. And as we get more detached in AI, we get lost. Right. And there are some ramifications right now. There was an article I read where, somebody, AI fed somebody's delusion, and that led into some tragedy for that individual, right. Yep. That they lost themselves. If we use our tools, AI or any other database will just be a tool for our soul, for our ability, our physics, our logic, our planning, our strategies, our circumstance. We can be the best, I don't mean this is, trash collector on the planet.
100%.
We could be the best car washer, dishwasher, right. Or whatever, and enjoy life because of the passion that we have found within us that comes to us from a divine source. There was a psychiatrist, he was a student of Freud. This is kind of a little bit of a side note, but it kind of taps into this. He broke away from Freud. Some people say that he was the father of mind-body medicine. I don't know about that. Wilhelm Reich was his name. And he started studying Ogon. He said there's energy in the atmosphere that if we can tap into, it can heal us. And he developed he met with Einstein. He had all these formulas. He said certain metals attract the energy, iron, I believe it is. And if we could he made boxes where, the energy would go in and would heal people of their imbalances. And the FDA came after him and said he was practicing, illegal medicine. They actually ended up putting him in jail, and he died in jail.
Oh, wow.
They burned all of his research.
Wow.
But he was tapping into some type of, he was trying to use a calculation to measure this energy. That he said, when you tap into these energies, something happens, right? Something happens. We've never been able to explain it. I think Jesus did the best way of describing it, maybe through, the practice of, prayer and acceptance, and tapping into that energy will transcend many, many things. And I think that's the magic of and brings us contentment despite our circumstances.
No, 100%.
Despite our
I love it.
Anyway.
I'm going to get you back in here, Josh, because I want to hear how you handled that. But when I hear you talking, Gary, of course, as I said, my position in life is that John 14, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. What does that mean globally? And I don't mean this in a condescending way to other religions, other faiths, and other philosophies, and etc. But sure. I think that God created the world and all the thoughts, inventions, and innovations we develop, including AI. I think he provides all that for us so that we can flourish in this world. But everything points to him. And when I watch Star Wars, I go, I can see God reaching out. When I read about Buddhism, I'm not a Buddhist, but I believe that God is reaching out and he's trying to point everybody to Jesus, that I believe Jesus embodies all of it. Like, I think every single thing, including Wilhelm, I can't remember his last name, the guy we were just talking about, which right, which I need to get that name because I've got to read about him. That just, you intrigued me. But I read about him and I go, part of the dilemma we have in society is we struggle to understand that the spiritual world is more powerful and more pervasive and comprehensive than anything that we create or anything we do. And so I think we become overwhelmed, whether it's medicine, psychology, or whatever. And so I think part of the reason I want to have this conversation that's sort of inclusive is I think many times Christians put themselves in a box and say, well, these are the only things we know about and can talk about. And anything that they think threatens that, they don't want to talk about it.
Well, can I ask you a question, Russ? Can I just get into this space? Because maybe you're my teacher here.
I don't know about that,
but we say, okay, God isn't everything. So, my definition of God is love. Yeah. So that's how I just say God is love. Whatever that means,
a biblical
right?
one.
And it's an energy of connection. It's an energy of healing, of growth, whatever. Yeah. And so then I say, and I'm also a Buddhist, and I'm also a Catholic, and I'm also a Jew, and I'm also a Sikh, because God is in everything, and I'm a Christian. I follow the teachings of Christ. Mm-hmm. So these to me are just other forms of God. Mm-hmm. But you said, I'm not a Buddhist. And I had a knee-jerk reaction to that and say, how are we separating ourselves from the collective and not dilute? Right. I don't know how to do this. Sure. So, very, very clear. I don't know how to do it. Sure. Remain solid in my faith. Yeah. With my Lord Jesus Christ, who I'm committed to. Yeah. Stay solid in my faith, and yet walk in the mystery of everything else. Yeah. Not be in denial that they too, even they may not see it. They might say, I'm not a Christian. They'd say, well, sorry you don't see that. Yeah. Right. Sorry you don't see that. I can be you, but you can't be me. Right. Right. To me,
so how do I process that?
Yeah, teach me, show me.
I don't think I can teach you, because it's a choice that every human being has to make about how they decide to view their relationship with God. So when I was early on, I would have told you, well, Jesus is right and you're wrong. So can we move on to the next subject? And we've had these conversations. I've told you a little bit of backstory on my life and stuff like that. I hold the conviction that, and so when I was in college, and I switched from being an economics guy to being a religion guy, which, that didn't actually happen in reality. I was still an economics guy because this is how I function, but I thought, well, I got to be in the ministry, so I better learn about this because I don't know anything about it. And I thought I'd learn in school. My professor and I clashed a lot, and it was friendly, contentious, but it was partly because he said to me once in class, because I kept questioning everything he said. He said, you act like there's absolute truth. And I think that probably is within the spectrum of Christianity. There are those like me who believe that the Bible is absolute truth. Therefore, all truth has to be measured against the Bible. Now, does everybody have to believe that? See, I don't believe everybody has to believe that. I don't think they have to. And I think everybody's got a choice. And part of what I want to do in the podcast, and it's why I love, you and I talk off about a lot of different things, right? Off camera. Part of what I want to have a podcast is because I want people to be able to sit down and think, well, what do I believe? Because it used to be important to me to convince people to believe what I believed. It's now important to me to get people to think about believing, because I think that we have a bigger problem in America today, that a lot of people don't believe anything except I'm right and you're wrong. They don't have, and that's not a deep belief. That's, to me, I'm right and you're wrong is not even a belief system. It's I don't even know what that is. That's barbaric. I think when you get down to it, society becomes barbaric when it's all about, well, my ideology is right and your ideology is wrong. And I believe what I do is right, but I also believe that the path I took, I was started as an agnostic. So, and I absolutely believe that God was working in my life then. And David says in prayer that even from my youth, you have been my God. I think God is greater. 1 John 3 and 4 talk about this. God is greater than our feelings. God is greater than our instincts and our intents. But I think Jesus is pretty clear. Okay, this is what you've got to do, and you've got to follow me. And he doesn't really leave wiggle room to like follow something else. What you're saying is, well, does that mean I can't do anything else? Well, I read about everything and I learn from everything. And so I think, to me, a Christian has to go, Jesus is absolute first and he's the whole, and anything else I look at and anything else I believe in has to fall within his parameters of what truth is. And when I'm looking at, you say, well, I'm a Buddhist. I don't say that because, well, one, I don't know enough about it to be one, but I also don't say it because I want to give people clarity about who Jesus is, because what I do with my day job, it's confusing and would cause people to not find Jesus if I threw everything out there. I feel like what you're doing is saying, I don't, and I learned from it, I don't want to close the door on someone who is, I'll choose a different thing, who is very committed to their African-American roots in Africa, and a way that the village that they come from and the tribe they come from and the things they believe. I don't want to take that away from them. I don't want to make them feel like you've got to get rid of that in order to follow Jesus. And so you're talking about something that's a little bit bigger than I generally deal with in my life.
It gets to the point, and I don't want to derail this conversation.
Don't worry, we're going to get back to Josh because I think people really do want to talk about that.
But the semantics, if I say, well, I'm a Baptist and I'm not Episcopalian.
Yeah. I hear you.
I'm a Presbyterian. Even I'm a Northern Baptist, not a Southern Baptist. I mean,
I
go,
you.
oh my gosh, the dissection of these things, to me, it's just an unfolding and an unfolding.
Well, I'm
of
definitely.
adversity.
I see your point on that because I'm not into that. I'm like,
I know that, and I know that. But I think it parlays into these other entities. Yeah. And I think I'm just kind of playing that devil's advocate.
I love it.
Maybe the Jesus advocate. I should buy.
Yeah, maybe you're Jesus advocate. Let's definitely not make you a devil's advocate. Let's make you a Jesus advocate. Well, see, and some people out there, let me just speak to this, then we're going to come to Josh, because I think the way you handled that, I think people need to get the inner workings of that. And I think what Gary is saying, I don't want our listeners to get confused. What Gary is saying is there's something going on within every human being's life where they have access to the kind of, I'll use the word power that Josh described, to overcome the things that come into your brain and into your heart that don't belong there. And he's saying, I think Gary is saying, for those Christians who are like, well, does Russ believe that I need to be a Buddhist? No, I'm not. That's not even the conversation. That's not even the conversation.
Just make it very clear.
I'm just trying to say to people, that's not even the conversation. The conversation is, and you nailed it, Gary, if we constantly find labels, then won't people miss Jesus? That's what you're saying. If we're constantly labeling, will people miss Jesus? And the main thing is to keep Jesus at the forefront and to show people that Jesus isn't everything. and that you can, that's how you get to him.
That's right.
And
so pause here, and I'm going to say something, and then we'll go to Josh.
Yeah.
The labeling speaks to the point of the Gen X problem.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Yeah. Now I'm all messed up.
All right.
Because I want that way.
To me, it's the same paradigm that's causing the disturbance.
Well, we're going to
dichotomy.
We're going to come back to that. So tell you what we're going to do after Josh, you're going to explain this, then we're going to take a break for a second. But so I want to connect all this for the listener, because it's easy to go, well, I'm confused, or not confused. That's a lot for me to bring in. There's two things. One, this podcast is not only for people who go to church. This podcast is not only people who are Christians. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people that are out there, and you should share this with your friends. How do I even think about this guy, Jesus? How do I even think about power? How do I even think about energy? How do I even think about flow? There's a lot of different things in society, academically, intellectually, emotionally, in different countries. There's a lot of different language used. And what I think Gary's saying is we got to be careful with the semantics, because in the semantics, someone can miss Jesus. He can totally be lost because I'm preoccupied with the label you just hit me with that I'm unfamiliar with. And I think for Josh, what you're saying is that he tapped into a level of confidence that is not human logic, because human logic, and let's just say this, because I'm with Gary on the AI thing, think AI is great. Human logic can never get you to an outcome where you can defy the statistics. And the statistics will dominate your life if you always go with human logic. And I think, Josh, what you did, I just want to go back, for a physics professor to say it's not for everyone. And I've talked to some younger people. They have auditory processing, they have ADHD, and people tell them, you'll never go to college. I'm a parent of a Down syndrome kid, and I can't even tell you, I don't even have a list long enough to say how many things I was told with my son with autism were done. Well, that's not going to happen. Or you're not going to be able to, you're going to need to institutionalize them, all these things. And if you don't have something in your life beyond your intellectual, your IQ, which people get carried away about IQ. If you don't have something in your life besides IQ, you can get in trouble. And in that instance, you didn't use your IQ, you used something else. What in the world happened right there? How did you process that mentally, emotionally? Like, because you went back to your room and went to work, and I'm like, most people would have went out and got some ice cream or alcohol or whiskey. Maybe got some whiskey.
Or when cried. When cried to sleep.
No, that's me. I'd have gone and cried.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, like, you're hearing the story from, I have a PhD, et cetera, all that you're saying, but going back to what we were saying before, I'm from Turlock. I barely got, I didn't get any of the schools I wanted. I got into this one school. My first course, I have no idea about what physics is. Wow. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing. And, this is my first test, literally my first test, C-. The guy's like, this isn't for you. So if you look at it from that perspective, I mean, everything, it felt like this is just, everything's against me here. And I think, it wasn't IQ, it wasn't intellect, I wasn't the smartest kid. I mean, none of that stuff. It was really just me going, it was more like a stubbornness, it was more like, I'm not going to let anyone tell me what I can do. I think that's,
oh, wow.
I think it's just the belief, I guess, that maybe, to share with everyone is that not to let anyone tell you what you can do. Why should this random physics professor determine what major I'm going to do, what I'm going to be? He's not. And I think it's just taking your own initiative and saying, I'm going to do, I'm not going to let someone else determine that. So, I told, I was trying to remember what it was. I think my son was trying out for the soccer team when he was young, and he didn't make it, just devastated, and like I told the story of Michael Jordan. Everyone knows the story of Michael Jordan, right? Got cut from the basketball team. Yeah. What if he got cut and he never played? But, of course, nobody mentions that he was cut from varsity, but.
They forget that part.
But, it's like you're telling that story, and I told him the story too. I'm like, this is your choice. You can say, okay, I'm done with soccer. I'm never going to play again. Or you can go back, you can start training, you can get back in, you can try again. And I think it's just going back to the scripture you said too earlier, Russ, about just not giving up, going forward and saying, there's something bigger than what's around me, what people are telling me, and really believing you can do that. So.
And I want to respond to you because you said it's like the scripture. It says, for the righteous man falls 7 times and rises again. As I referred to before, the words that are used in the Bible about righteous have to do with relational, not performative. And I want to come back to what you said. You had what a lot of people use today is the word agency. And Gary is saying, I think agency comes from someplace other than the logic of your brain. The capacity you had to say, I'm not who you're telling me I am. Great. And I'll just say, for the sake of professors, we all know when you go into the class of 300, their job is to cut it down. They don't. Right. They're those are weed out classes, and so they're hoping that kids will hear that phrase, "It's not for you," and leave, because they only want to work with the kids who they think can do it. What Josh is telling you right now is that at that moment, were you a Christian, not a Christian at that time?
No, I was just
see, that goes back to what Gary was saying, that God was working in your life even at that moment, and he was giving you the confidence you needed. And we know this because of people in the Bible, Acts 11, like Cornelius, who before he was a Christian was doing powerful stuff. And God said, I heard your prayers, even though you aren't, quote unquote, a Christian yet. I was hearing your prayers and guiding you to this point. Paul was guided to where he needed to be. God is moving in your life, whether you call yourself a Christian or not, whether you call yourself a believer or not, whether you have faith in God or not. Maybe you have faith in the moon, but like, I'm a believer that Santa Claus and the tooth fairy, and all, I'm a believer in all. People say, you shouldn't lie to your kid. We're not lying to their kids. We're giving our kids imagination, and without imagination, they're going to be locked into listening to the professor say you can't be something and believing it, because imagination says, I heard your facts, but I believe in something bigger than your facts. And I think most scientists, I love science, most scientists who make great discoveries, that's exactly what they do, right? They're able to look at what the world says it's like and go, yeah, I don't think that's the way the world works. And so I appreciate you sharing that story. And I think too, just you obviously are highly intelligent, so let's not diminish that part. I don't, it's like that commercial where the guy's driving and they go, do not attempt this. This is a professional driver. We're not telling everybody to go. When the physics professor tells you this isn't for you, not everybody should go do that. Some people need to go, maybe I should become an English professor and write a bestseller. Like, I think that also is one way to respond to it. Going back to what you said, Gary, about it, you don't have to get a PhD and you don't have to go to that school. Martin Luther King gave that great drum major sermon where he talked about, if you're going to be a street sweeper, sweep streets the way Michelangelo painted paintings, that your identity is yours, whether you're from this country, a different country, you speak a different language, you speak with an accent. And I think we're talking about fear of failure, and what we're really blowing it up to be that the only reason you would fear failure is if you have no sense of faith or awareness that there's something bigger going on in your life than what you see with your eyes. We'll come back in just a minute, take a little break, and I'm looking to get into this labeling as Gen X's problem.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Quick Quiet Times. You know how one quick decision, hitting send on that email, raising your hand in class, taking that last second shot can change everything? The problem is, usually in those moments, fear talks louder than our faith. And just like one quick decision can change your day, even a few focused minutes with God can change your life. That's why we created Quick Quiet Times, 10-minute devotionals that help you pause, focus, and connect with God, even when life is moving a mile a minute. Here are a few that came out from this past week that I thought you would like. The Comparison Trap. Escape envy before it steals your joy. The Temptation Takedown. Fight back when life whispers, just give in. The Friendship Filter. Choose friendships who actually lift you up. These are short, simple, life-changing. Even a few minutes with God can flip your day, your perspective, and your life. Try one today at deepspirituality.com/quickquiettimes, because even tiny moments can change everything. Now, back to the conversation.
We're talking about diagnoses, right? And, ADHD or, however, that language has taken on a different flavor from where it started. A lot of diagnostic terms are used now as part of our common interchange to describe experiences that were not necessarily the original form of those kind of labels. the language has morphed and changed. And so initially, terms like ADHD meant that there was a kind of a significant dysfunction in the quality of life in terms of living, disturbance, a significant disturbance compared to maybe the general population. And now these labels are describing disappointments or frustrations or maybe even preoccupations that don't meet the psychiatric necessarily original definitions. But they become a common term. I'm having a panic attack today, meaning I have anxiety, or I stopped and I'm worried about my presentation to my boss, and they call that a panic attack. Well, the panic attacks usually would get you into the emergency room for medication.
Yeah.
Today, it's a stop and a pause, but the label is called, I think I had a panic attack this morning, or I'm bipolar because I get sad when my girlfriend yells at me. Something, the language to me is part of the social matrix of our way of communicating with each other. And I think the population has now morphed into that to be a more of an accepted norm than actually a disturbance. Some of that is a positive thing because we may be actually dismantling kind of biases. On the other hand, people hold on to them as identities, as descriptions. Like I have ADHD, or what do I do with that? And so, and then the resources now are more available, or they're not making use of the resources. But I'm aware that the language has become more commonplace.
Yeah.
I'm not always clear that it means what it originally was meant to mean. So,
it's interesting, a lot of times psychology, psychiatry, people will call them the soft sciences, right? And I'm not sure that would be, I don't know how to think about that, but you read that and you hear that. And then what Josh was, whether it's physics or chemistry or whatever, those are the hard sciences. And again, the part, to me, this is just me talking, the part of the soft science part, I don't know that it has to do with professionals and the people who work in that as much as it has to do with society and the way it views it. And it's easier to say, grab psychological or sociological terms than it is to grab scientific terms. Like, nobody's going to grab a physics term and say, I'm going to use this as a way to describe my friendships, or I'm going to use this as a way to describe my experiences. Maybe simply because physics, biology, etc., have not woven themselves into the fabric of our society. Here's my point. There are a number of books people can read. I'm not going to tell you, I didn't come with these books listed, these books I've read that talk about the problem that you're addressing, which is that you've got a society, one, that is, by some people's perspective, overusing medication, or inappropriately, I'm saying, using medication for things that are not necessarily clinical issues. And then you have people who are using terminology for things that are not yet necessarily clinical issues. And one of the things I was listening to, I forgot who I was listening to, and the guy said a really appropriate thing. He said, a lot of people today are treating normal suffering as traumatic events. And I think part of the reason for that, I don't blame psychology or psychiatry. I think it's when you push God out of every part of society, which has happened, when colleges get rid of their religion departments, in which that could be fiscal. That could be they don't make enough money, which I'm totally understand that. When going back to what we talked about earlier, when you get the kind of labeling going on in religion, I think religion has been driven out of the public square. And I'm not talking about politics now. I'm talking about which Stephen Prothero of Boston University talked about before. Well, he talks about it still, but before he retired, he wrote books not just about Christianity, but about all religions, that were living in a religiously illiterate country. That he believed that there ought to be classes in school not to teach one religion, but to teach all about them, so kids have the option and idea to know, oh, this is another thing. And I think part of it is, it used to be in society, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, that people had a religious vocabulary. Then later on, when emotional intelligence and all that was discussed, they began to get an emotional vocabulary. And I think we've lost the religion vocabulary, which can be helpful. We have some of the emotional vocabulary, but I think some people are trying to use psychology vocabulary to describe emotional conditions. And I say all this to say, we're living in a society, I think, that is really challenged to give people the kind of spiritual and emotional education they need to manage in life, just in general. And still, I actually think there's a huge need for clinical help, because I think that there's a lot of, I was listening to one expert in ADHD, he's a doctor who treats ADHD, and I was educated by what you said about ADHD, Gary, in the sense that people are using, they've diminished the definition of it for their own attempt to label what they're going through. But he said, I think a lot of prisons are filled with people who actually have real ADHD. And I think that's one of the challenges of any big country. How do you solve the mental health crisis? So as I listen, I go, you got three things going on. One, the diminishment of faith and religion as an option for people to look at to explain their human experience and process it. A failure in the mental health realm to treat people who actually have significant clinical challenges that have not been identified, maybe because they haven't even had access to the kind of treatments that could tell them, you're not a criminal per se, you've got this, but if you don't deal with this, that could be your outcome. And then there's the mental category, I think, of just, a society today that's confused. Like I was, let me see if I can pull it up. Scott Galloway is one of my favorite guys, and he quotes a lot of statistics about men. And the reason I bring this up, I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but we had these shootings at schools of a conservative activist and the entertainer who killed some 14-year-old girl, put him in the back of his Tesla. Like, all this stuff is going on. Look at these statistics about men. Men are 4 times more likely to die of suicide. Men are 12 times more likely to be incarcerated. 1 in 7 men reports having no friends. 3 in 4 deaths of despair, that would be, I'm despairing about my life, are men. 3 in 4 that are despairing about my life. Under 30s, are people under 30 are 24% less wealthy than their peers that are 40 years old, meaning we are facing a crisis, in my mind, amongst young men, and that's been written about, talked about. There's some great books and podcasts about that. And I think this goes to the labeling. And I want to say again, maybe I'm being confusing. I hope not to the audience. I think what you're dealing with is, it used to be that people had church to go to for community, or they had Boy Scouts to go to for community, or whatever it may be. A lot of those institutions are fading. And so you lose that support system. And then we also don't do a great job in school of teaching kids how to process emotions in life. And I'm not saying that there should be, the math teacher should be doing that, but we need to be doing something. And then I think we don't necessarily treat well still the people who have clinical issues. Like I deal with parents who, well, my kid will be fine. He doesn't need to go get that treatment, or he doesn't want to, or she doesn't want to. And I tell them, I go, look, when there's a serious issue, I mean, we can read the Bible to your kid till they're blue in the face, but if they don't get treatment for the level of depression they have, or if they don't get treatment, for the clinical anxiety they have, it's gonna be difficult for them to go to places with a lot of people. So when you said about Gen Z, I think what Gen Z does well is they are aware that they have these needs in their life. They're aware that and they're not afraid to talk about it. Our society doesn't seem well equipped to help them know how to take what they're observing in their life and process it. So that was rather long-winded, but I just wanted to put that out there for you guys to think about, and it's even to talk about, and especially with regard to men, because I think a lot of young boys, I know my dad, he wasn't a talker, emotional, he was like an emotional guy. He was in the Korean War. He was like, kind of quiet and World War II veteran, didn't say much. And certainly we didn't have a lot of emotional conversations. And so I think that has to be learned. And I don't know that society is equipped to do that. And I say all that when you talk about emotions, when you have a vocabulary that's spiritual, it makes you more capable of resilience, which allows you to handle failure and find the path to success. So those are some thoughts. But Gary, you probably know more about this than I could ever know about this.
It's interesting that, this one monk told me, he said, religion are for all those people who are afraid of being broken. Spirituality is for the rest of us who have been.
Wow. That's awesome.
And I think it's the vulnerability and being fragile. We talked about this before, that allows us to find, each other or seek help. Clearly, if you're having a continual challenge, reach out, right? Clearly get help. Yeah. There are tools out there. Right. And you're right. I think the language is evolving. I think we're not going to go back. I'm just saying I'm seeing it change.
Okay.
We're going to need a new language to describe when that tipping point has changed, because it's become commonplace and now it dilutes the emphasis that it used to have. When I was growing up, my mom would read Ann Landers.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember who that is,
100%.
But she was everyone would read it on Sunday. Letters to Ann Landers, and she would have advice for everybody. Mm-hmm. New York Times has started an article, Ask Your Therapist. Now, back in Ann Landers, you couldn't say ask your therapist. There was a taboo against that.
Good point.
If you had to go see a therapist, don't tell that Uncle Johnny is seeing a therapist.
It's a secret.
That's right.
Bad on you. We don't talk about that here. Now it's in the New York Times, an article, Ask Your Therapist. And there's a licensed therapist who's taking letters and discussing cases in the New York Times. Yeah. We've changed. Our language is changing. Those are Ann Landers issues. And then there is, I'm despondent. I don't have the drive to live anymore. I feel lonely. I feel, okay, we need a new language to get help to that individual. We need to recognize it. We need to not dilute it. And then there are tools for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a different, I think the language is evolving. It's becoming more commonplace. So how do we identify those that need to kind of do that now? The other thing that you're mentioning, men have always suffered from those things as far as, the older you get, the more you see those trends. The majority of men not talk about problems. Right. When there are disturbances, they're more apt to drink. They're more apt to get in jail. They're more apt to get in fights. Okay. The highest percentage back then, and I think still now, women go and get help. There are more women in psychotherapy and treatment programs than men. There are more men in jail than there are women.
Well, what's interesting about that women tend to go to church more and stay more and bring their kids.
I always say, you want a good night out with your husband? Lather them with progesterone. Then you can have a night out with your girlfriend. I mean, I'm just saying.
That's one of the best ones I've heard in a long time. Go ahead, keep going.
Because the hormonal drive of the brain has always been, we've been hunters, we've been alone out in the jungle by ourselves. Anthropologically, we've isolated and done what we needed to do. Kill the food, drag it home and sleep.
I'm gonna get Josh in here, but I'm gonna let me see. I'm gonna give both of you an opportunity to help me with this, or to tell me I'm wrong, or to tell me keep exploring, whatever. So my position is that that therapy, that psychiatry, that biology, that chemistry, physics, that none of them at their base are spiritual. That's my position. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that the practice of them has to be without spirituality, but I'm saying when you go to school and you sit in a class and you hear about it, there's no spirituality introduced here. And this is why it's important. I think I would argue that some of these statistics, and there are many more to be quoted, but we don't want to turn this into a stat econ farm, but that a lot of these statistics are the way they are because God has been erased from the conversation as an option that people can have. I don't think you're going to go into many places and other than church where someone's going to say, I think you need to pursue looking at spiritual things because they have answers to issues that you're facing in your life that cannot be answered by human awareness and human logic or human study alone. And I just so I find it interesting that this assassin that of the conservative activist, that the way he was caught is that he confessed, and that his dad had him talk to his priest or whatever, and that's how it came out. And I think I'm not saying anything's good about the death of anyone at all. What I'm saying is there's so few times in life where people today in 2025 are being told religion, faith in God is not political. I understand it's being used in a lot of places as politics, but it's an answer for the questions of the soul. It's the psychic issues you face that aren't limited to your brain chemistry, that aren't limited to your physiology, but there's something that goes on inside of you. And I think a lot of young people don't know. Well, I take that back. I think a lot of young people are figuring it out because you're seeing increase in Bible reading and church attendance by Gen Z. And I think without being told, and anybody wants to go search that out, you can look at Barna, you can look at Pew Research, that trends are upward, especially for young men. And a lot of it is that I think people are going, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried this. This helped me, but it didn't completely help me find my way. Purposelessness is something missing. So I think I'm an advocate right now for take advantage of everything you need. Like you just said, Gary, like if you have a challenge, reach out and ask for help. And if you're a guy, I don't think you should be embarrassed by that. I think it's the physiology that we have. I don't think that's a judgment on who you are. Kevin Love's one of my favorite NBA guys because he came out and talked about mental health challenges. And I think he's helped so many people by doing that. And he's a super cool dude. But I think I want to advocate maybe to our audience, don't just give your kid one or two lanes. Expand that lane to include the spirituality that includes Jesus and the Bible, and don't get turned off by the politics of religion today, because most people that are Christian are not in that lane. They're trying to live their life and they're trying to make a go of it. And so I don't want to be against something. That's not what I'm trying to say. I guess I'm more like, could we please societally add to it spirituality? Could we please in society say, hey, you should try this, and you should get your spirituality on set so you have a balance. What do you think about this, Josh? I mean, you're a parent, so parents, a lot of times we're dealing with all kinds of things with kids. And Gary, already, you educated me, Gary, when you said men have always dealt with this kind of a thing. Those statistics have been around longer than just now. I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. So I appreciate you mentioning that. But Josh, and then once you talk and we kind of round this out, I want to wind us down with a sort of some practical things for people when they walk away. Hey, what can I do? What can I tackle? What can I get after?
Yeah, I think for the, well, I don't know. We talked about a lot of things. I guess going back to the, lack of spirituality in terms of, sciences and things like that. I think that's certainly what I experience on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of, it's all data. There's not a lot of discussion about spiritual things. And, that can be challenging, because I think when you do think of only what the statistics are, only the data in front of you, you do kind of miss something. And I think even, going back to early research, I mean, when physics started, right, the reason that people started studying the world is they said, wow, there's order, there's a God that exists, and then we're gonna do these studies because of that. So there's inherent spirituality, in related to all these sciences. But I think what's happened certainly in the most recent times, but even probably the last 50 years, is there's been sort of a divide where there's kind of like a spiritual religious side and a scientific side, and it kind of, there's politics and there's other things involved in that, but I think there's this notion that these are two separate things and they don't mix. And I think that's not a good way to think about that, just both from a physical standpoint, but also just socially, just it really is robbing us of something, I think, when you don't have both aspects.
I love that. I think probably you just said more succinctly and accurately what I was trying to say and took too long to say. Gary, does that make sense to you that and I think maybe it gets back to what you and I were talking about way earlier, which is when we put the labels and we put the boxes and the boundaries in place, people can't take advantage of all the things that help them to be able to channel, understand, and live their life.
I want to offer a compliment to you, Russ. What drew me is, my son went up to the Bay Area and discovered, the church there, and I visited him often, and I started attending the church, and I felt the energy there that was somewhat different from many churches that I visited. And I think it was in the activity of the relationships and the camaraderie with the young people, whether it's sports or barbecues or hanging out and watching TV, and that I began to see a community of spirit. And I think, some of the studies have shown, and even, the decline in attendance of the churches, is that one theory is that the churches became too text bound, too Bible bound, too verse bound, too rule bound, and lost the spirituality of reverence, of chanting or singing or sharing, and as the church did that, there was also people going elsewhere to find it. Because I think we're in a revolution right now of people seeking spirituality, of a higher level of consciousness, and how do we bring them back into a fold where we produce more and more of that awakening. I want to go where I'm loved. I want to go where people reach over and say, "Hey, it's good to see you again."
Right. Yeah.
And I go to I remember going to one church, and I'd show up every week, always the stranger, even though it's the same person, same place, and still that person didn't remember me. And after years of doing that, I said, and then here was the mind, and it works. Everybody has a different values, so it works for some people.
Yeah.
But when music played, sometimes I want to wave my hands. But if you wave your hand in that community, you're not supposed to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a different way. And in another community, they got a rock band in front, and all the kids are dancing to the hymns of the church, right?
Right.
But I think the young people are looking for that expression of love, for that freedom, for no shame, and I think that's the consciousness. That's the spirit. How do we find the spirit? How do we let go of the shame and guilt and the rule bounds and rejoice in the love of God and Christ? I think that's where everything is. We want to promote more and more of that. How do we do that?
It's funny what you're bringing up, and I think we'll start to what I hope all of the people listening do is go, what can I get out of the podcast? How to have a conversation. And I think that's important. I think in some ways, in a text bound, not only church, but a text bound society, in a society. Society itself is rule bound, and you're seeing today, every day, there's what they call the culture wars, are fights over what are the rules going to be. And I think some of that is the loss of the fluidity of, I'll go to what we've all been talking about, is love, the fluidity of love. God is love. And when you've got love, you get fluidity, because I think there's forgiveness, there's understanding, there's an attempt to know people rather than to categorize or judge people. And I think it's something I've grown in my faith. My convictions are very, very deep. Like, if never heard me or whatever, that's fine. But my convictions are very, very deep. But what I understand about life that I didn't understand when I was 20 is that the conversation is where everything starts. I was not into religion. I thought church was a place you went to because you couldn't accomplish things. You couldn't make the team. You couldn't be elected president of the student body. You couldn't get a girlfriend. I thought that was the place where people go who can't do something. And I saw myself as a can-do person, so I was like, I don't need to go there. But the thing I didn't understand is it was a community based on Jesus's life and God's power that produces love. And I think what you're talking about is both of you are both talking about is really big. And love is not separate from physics. Love is not separate from physiology, psychology. Yeah.
So I once asked an astrophysicist, and you could probably address this. We were having a discussion about love. And I said, is there an equation for that? I said, do you believe in love? And he said, yeah. I said, do you have an equation for it? And he goes, we don't understand that energy yet, right? There's not a, yeah. But I what you're speaking of, I think, is how do we find it? How do we practice it? It's patience, forgiveness, letting go, and the one prayer that I practice every day: "Let Your will be done."
Well, hey, I'll tell you something. I think there's a book I read years and years ago. I was already a Christian, but I was struggling because when I became a Christian, I'd read philosophy, science. I knew in my heart, I think, that there was a way that you could live life and you could get an outcome of happiness. I just didn't know what it was. And I knew that I was achieving and accomplishing, but I'm sure both of you felt this. You achieve something, but then when you have it, all of a sudden you're like, oh, this didn't solve that problem I was trying to solve. You know what I'm saying? Right. And the book's called The Father Heart of God by Floyd McClung. And I read it, and for the first time, I began to really get it, that we learn love because God loves us. And this is why the faith I practice is a relationship with God that motivates you to be part of church or motivates you to read your Bible. And a lot of people think that Christianity is rule-based. It's not. It is relationship-based. That's why it says God so loved the world, he sent Jesus to die on a cross, because it's God's trying to express his love to a people who can't comprehend it. And this goes to your point about AI. I relate AI to the Tower of Babel. That once again, man thinks they've discovered something that's going to put them on God's level. And what they don't understand is that IQ and EQ don't encompass, if we want to, SQ, a spiritual quotient, the capacity to understand the things that we can't understand with human logic. And so I would encourage people out there, if you really want to get going, look at God and say, I want a relationship with God. Ephesians 3 says that you want to see the depths, the heights, the widths, and the lengths of God's love. And when you have that kind of love, it makes you as resilient as Josh was when he faced that physics professor.
And love is a verb.
Yeah, say that again?
Love is a verb.
Yes, love is a verb. And there's someone who sings a song called Love is a Verb, John Mayer. John Mayer has a song, and it's called Love is a Verb. 100%. And see, I'm a big believer that a lot of the time when I came to church, I think everybody kind of, I struggled with intimacy because I was coming out of a background and an experience of life that I didn't even know what to do with that or how to express that, because it hadn't been part of my upbringing in a significant way. And so I always felt like, oh, these people hug and kiss and do all these things. And I really didn't grow up doing all that. And then I found out love is a verb, that it's the actions you take that reveal your love. It's not the performative things you take. Now, I want to be good at the performative stuff too. But I think if I were to wrap it all up, I'd encourage people to go back and read Hebrews 12, because it talks about Jesus there and it talks about dropping things and letting go of things. And I may write a chemistry lab on that. But I think what we want to do is encourage everybody out there from our conversation, drop preconceptions, drop labels, and get out there and say, what are the things inside of me that are making me vulnerable to doubting that God wants to do something special with my life, that are making me dissatisfied with who I am? Because the thing God wants to do is he wants to love you. I'll pull another reference, Billy Joel, just the way you are. And that doesn't mean we don't need to change, but it means the essence of who we are is lovable. And I found that when I experienced God's love, I went, oh, I'm not unworthy. I don't have anything to be ashamed about. I don't need to be perfect. And what I've loved about this conversation today, and I'll let you guys have the last word on the conversation today, is we were able to talk to each other about a variety of things. And a lot of times I think in society, because people are texting and emailing, they don't actually have significant conversations where they discuss what everybody's thinking and actually listen and hear each other and change their mind or say, I don't know. And this conversation's had all that. And I appreciate both of you for doing it and being a part of it. And I hope you'll keep coming on, because I learn a lot when I'm talking to you, as I did today. But Josh, I'll give you a final word on this. And Gary, I'll give you a final word on this. And we'll promise the listeners that we'll come back again. And when you guys are done with your final word, I'll give us a final scripture to go away with. And we'll live to dream for more days ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree. I think what's the best part about this is just having the conversation and getting to share views. And, I think with the society, especially, with the age of social media, where it's just, everyone wants a one-word answer or a quick video, and there's no sort of time to sit down and have a conversation. And that's, I think, what I appreciate about it is sharing, just sitting with both of you guys and just hearing what you have to say and just having a dialogue has been really, really helpful. And I've learned a ton. So I really appreciate the time.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think you tapped into it, and it was our last conversation too, is accepting our imperfection, allowing us to be vulnerable, and reaching out in that process to others to get the help that we need, for whether it's just a little challenge of getting through something or really going into a deeper place. And I think the vulnerability aspect, that God carries us through our vulnerability, and just to practice letting go and let His will be done. And so, and because I'll end it with this note, and because you said we might come back again, then I'll start off with my physics story.
Oh, yes. Make a note of that, Dathan, because I've got to have his physics story. My physics stories ended in high school. I didn't do anymore, so I don't have stories like you guys. I'm going to leave everybody with a thought. Psalm 46, verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. In everything we've said, what we've tried to do is talk about internally and externally and all around, how can we become the kind of people who meet our internal needs, our spiritual needs, our mental health needs, our physical needs in such a way that we can be confident enough to, like Josh, be able to hear ourselves defined in a way and then say, no, that's not who I am, and become who we're meant to be. Whoever you are, wherever you are out there, I hope you spend some time not just listening to what we say, because we don't claim to know everything, but listening to how we talk, and find yourself a couple of friends like we've got to sit down and talk about life and do the things a lot of us did in college when we were much more open to thinking about a lot of things, and do it again. I think it'll make you younger if you're older. It'll make you more mature if you're younger. And it'll make the world a better place, so we have more peace and more love and more enjoyment than we do violence and anger and hate. This is Deep Spirituality. We're signing off this podcast. Josh Turner and Gary Ruelas, both physics icons and PhDs. And me, I'm just here to facilitate their greatness. We'll see you on the next time around.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks a lot.